Okay.
Hello.
I'm Kristen.
Caitlin.
Sydney. Hi.
You're kind of far away.
Sorry.
And
We're going to talk about some readings today.
we're going to start with Sue and Sue.
Chapter 23.
So, what I thought was interesting is it says 1/4 of adults acknowledge some same-sex attraction. And, to acknowledge it, sure, but, okay, everyone, I feel like, in some way is bisexual and, just won't admit it because they're afraid of the label. But, you can look at, me for Megan Fox. I could look at Megan Fox and be like, oh, she is an attractive woman. I don't want to do anything with her, but she's attractive, and I can tell that. And I feel like that, to some degree, is, bisexual. So I feel like it should be everyone that acknowledges some type of same-sex attraction.
I feel like for guys, that's a lot harder because they're so afraid of being called gay. So that's why no guy will say, oh, he's a handsome guy, because they're so focused on, being manly, and I don't want to be called gay. I don't want to be called gay for calling another guy attractive. So I think that's part of it. But I get what you're saying.
I thought it was interesting that they talked about how, in the past, it wasn't as accepted, parents weren't as accepting, but now it's the reading was mentioning, oh yeah, we're more accepting, but there's so much, society still has so much, stereotypes and, still putting people down that just don't fit the norm. So I still, even though it seems oh, it's getting better, is it really? I thought that was interesting.
I thought it was interesting how they were talking about, the changes occurring with, society's views regarding transgender people. And, I feel like in a way it's getting better, but then you also have, where they can't get into, the military now or something. Mm-hmm. And it's, I feel like the reasoning behind that isn't, I don't know, very good. I don't know, they have reasons, but I'm are those actual valid reasons why someone who's transgender couldn't be in it, or is it just more of, a hate thing?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I thought the section where they talked about how coming out is a big challenge for ethnic groups because then they become multiple minorities. So they face discrimination from society as a whole, and then also there are the minority groups that they already belong to.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of talking about how in class we've talked about the division in minority groups, and that just kind of made me think of that.
Kind of going off of that, it made me it was interesting to me when it was talking about discrimination and being harassed in the school environment, which is already sad in itself, because here we are, school's supposed to be about an education place. You're not supposed to be scared to go to school or worrying about you're just here to learn. And it was really interesting. One of the parts that I wrote was middle to high school students, over 80% of the LGBTQ students reported experiencing harassment at school, and and about 2/3 reported feeling unsafe about their sexual orientation. That's just sad. You can't even go to school just to learn without and you don't feel safe.
Yeah, I wrote down a quote from the chapter, and it said, when they begin to acknowledge their sexual or transgender identity, they soon confront the stigma associated with being gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. Mm-hmm. Just kind of them coming to the reality of societally, this is not the normal or accepted. and how hard that must be, and the fact that, like you said, schools are supposed to be safe, but they're not.
And then, like, on top of that, if, like, the kid gets, like, a diagnosis, like, they go to therapy and they get, like, a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, then, like, there's, like, the distress and, like, stereotypes that go with that as well. I wrote down a quote that said one of the greatest agonies is when your anatomy doesn't match, like, who you are on the inside, which I felt like that was, like, really powerful because you want to express who you are, and yet people others, even your family, like, won't accept you. Like, that's just, it's heartbreaking.
That makes me think about what we were talking about in class last time. How, I don't remember who it was, but somebody was talking about how they think people who are transgendered, who, like, want to have, like, the surgery, are only doing it because of, like, societal pressures, like, to want to, like, look a certain way to feel like they fit in or something like that. And to me, I didn't agree with that. To me, I feel like it's more of a, like, anatomy type thing. Like, you, like, literally feel like your body doesn't match, like, the way you're thinking. And I feel like that's a lot more complex than just, like, I mean, societal influences are definitely complex, but, like, what's actually going on inside your body, I feel like that's a lot more, I don't know. I feel like assuming that people want to have that type of surgery just because of societal influences is not exactly accurate.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought it was interesting that the chapter talked about how for transgender people it's easier to transition from a woman to a man than from a man transitioning to being a woman, and that they expressed more satisfaction. That was kind of interesting. I wonder, didn't the chapter also say something about it had to do with their hardest part was, like, losing their male privilege?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that,
Did
like,
say that?
Yeah, I think they had, like, a quote from someone, and they said that that's one thing that they noticed about the change. It's like, okay, I had to, like, give that part of me up.
Yeah. Interesting. The chapter also talked about ageism within the LGBT community. That kind of was interesting. It said that I don't remember the number, but there's a huge population of people in the LGBT community that are, age 65 and up?
Mm-hmm.
And that said the number's expected to, like, double or really increase in the next 15 years. It's kind of interesting.
I thought it was interesting that, not really interesting, but just, like, something to think about, like, watching what you say if, like, you have a transgender client, or if you, like, even, like, just, like, not assuming, but, like, how it says assuming that a client is heterosexual makes it harder to bring up the issues around sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if someone is transgender and you're assuming that they're, like, not, or you're just, like, assuming something, then it's harder for them to actually bring up the real issue, because then they start
feel
to think
judged
that
already.
Yeah. So it's like, why even bring that up if you're already, like, assuming something? So I just thought that was something to keep in mind.
Kind of going off of that, I thought it was interesting that the reading mentioned, like, coming out is an ongoing process, and each time they need to determine, like, how much they want to disclose and, like, who they want to do it, and, like, it's always, like, it's not like, oh, I just did it once and I'm done. It's like it's a continuous process, and so I can't imagine what that is like to constantly have to go through over and over with every new person that comes in your life or you want to disclose to. And kind of, it's almost like you're going through going through it all over again.
Yeah.
I think it was talking about how it's, like, really important to encourage school professional people and everything to enforce policies that protect all these youth, just because, I don't know, I feel like even in like on social media, you can see a lot of things like happening in schools where the teachers or the staff at schools are mistreating them, like whether it comes like to what bathrooms to use and things like that. And at this point, it's like, how are there still teachers that are like acting that way? You know, like if you're going in to work with kids, how are you not accepting of everyone? But yeah, I don't know. Like, for example, the school I worked at, one of like the helpers there would like come in and there would be a student who didn't identify as anything, and she like ranted to me like one day in the classroom about how she doesn't understand like how this kid isn't identifying as anything, that she doesn't understand kids like of that in this age group anymore, and blah blah blah. And I was just like sitting there listening to her, and I didn't know what to say because I was just like, well, maybe you should educate yourself. I didn't say that, but I wanted to. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but that would have been like hard to do because, like, you know, she's a teacher, she's been there longer. That would have felt like really awkward. But I mean, she would need to educate yourself. Like,
yeah, I mean,
as a
it was
teacher.
an older woman, I'd say like in her late 60s. So I feel like once you get to that age, like trying to like change the way that you've seen things for your whole life is kind of difficult.
Right.
But at the same time, you're working in a school.
Yeah.
Like,
at least being like aware and like just trying to understand.
Yeah, that makes me think of in my practicum, the school counselor that I'm shadowing right now. She's really good about, like, when she's talking to kids, she says your parents. She doesn't say like mom and dad or like assume anything, because a lot of the kids at the school have divorced parents, or like they live in more than one household, or she said sometimes they have two moms or two dads. So I think as counselors, that's really important for us to like become accustomed to that language. In the chapter, it talked about using like the term partner instead of boyfriend or girlfriend, and just being mindful of those type of things.
One thing that kind of I thought was interesting was about the adoption and how, like, if a gay couple came in, it says like one of the people that I quoted said, I've seen a gay couple come in and like has seen like 30 children and that still wouldn't get a child like to adopt because the agency didn't find them as fit parents, which not meeting the agency standards, which is like, why should that even be a factor? Like, these are two people that want to come in and like support and love a child, and, you know, and be parents, and yet the agency's making that like choice and be like, oh, you're not fit because you're two guys or two women or whatever.
Yeah, it's really frustrating because I feel like so many kids get mistreated in the foster system. Why would you not want to give them to like good parents?
Yeah.
Regardless of their sexual orientation.
Another, I'm like kind of jumping a little bit, but like another part that I thought was interesting was when the transgendered teen, I think her name's Layla Alcorn, she like stepped in front of a semi-trailer truck and she died because of suicide, and she left a note, and because her families didn't accept her for who she is, and I think she was trying to make it like a message like how important like this, but like to take her own life. I feel like she had to do that, or it was important for her to do, and I thought it was interesting because in kind of on all the readings too, like suicide attempt and like actually going through with it, like that's pretty high for especially LGBTQ youth, which is really, that's important for, I feel like that's really important for us as future counselors to be aware of that, because that's, you know, that's someone's life. And, like, they don't feel validated and they feel victimized, so like we need to do everything that we can to make them feel safe and that they can keep going.
Do you want to talk about the TED Talk?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the TED Talk. The first thing that I wrote down was, like, it was the first TED Talk about bisexuality,
Yeah.
like, ever.
I wrote that too.
And I was like, how many TED Talks are there out there? There's so many, but, like, this is, like, the first one. I was very shocked about that.
Yeah, she kind of described it as saying that bisexuality is like the invisible identity, which I never really thought about before, but there are quite a few stereotypes associated with being bisexual, like saying that they're just indecisive or confused or they're experimenting. I feel like it definitely, people focus on that so much less than like, oh, you're gay or lesbian or you're straight, like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I like how I never thought about thinking of bisexuality as only like meaning that there's two genders. Like it means like, because like bi means like two, so like female and male, and that's like it. And I never thought about it meaning that before. Like I always thought of it as a more like broad and open term, including everything. But like I guess that is technically what it means. I just never thought about it that way before. So I thought her like idea of bisexuality was like pretty creative.
Yeah.
And I was like, I feel like that should be the new term because I just never thought of bisexuality as only meaning two genders.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way either, as like she said, it like reinforces the gender binary. But I guess I just never thought about it in that context. Interesting point.
I thought it was interesting that she said when we push people into those like two categories, it restricts all of us. And like going on to say like we all feel constrained by our gender at certain times. And I feel like that's like true like almost on a daily basis for everyone. Like you're always doing like mannerisms or like anything that like fits your gender, especially men, because they don't want to act a certain way or do certain like things. Like sometimes, like I just noticed for myself when I look at men and like they cross their legs, sometimes I think it looks kind of feminine, and I'm like, why do I like assume that like crossing your legs like that is like a feminine like way of sitting? I don't know, but it just like pops into my head. But I notice myself like thinking those things. And I'm just like, I don't know.
Well, I feel like at least from our last like readings as well, and I think a little bit on this, it's like been reinforced ever since we were little to think like that. But it's good like that we're being mindful now, like when those moments happen, like to be more aware of it instead of just letting it like the thought come by. Like now you're like, okay, like you're being more aware of what you're thinking about, which I think is important for us.
I thought it was interesting how she was talking about how sexual orientation is about who you're attracted to in terms of gender, but bisexuality is what you believe about gender. So, like, anyone could technically be bisexual, even people who consider themselves heterosexual, as long as they believe that there's more than two genders.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting.
And I think having that kind of allows, like it's not, like people who are, like, only attracted to, like, for me, like, I'm only attracted to guys, like, that invites me into the conversation, instead of it being like, oh, you don't count, you know?
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Which I like, because, like, I mean, that's the whole point, like, we want everyone to come together and, like, work on this, and, like, be, like, validate everyone's experience.
Yeah, I like, she talked a little bit about how you were always forced to, like, check the box for only two options, and her whole idea of, like, being bisexual kind of eliminates those ideas of gender roles. Like, we can just because you're a heterosexual female doesn't mean you have to, like, act feminine, or just because you're a male doesn't mean you have to act super masculine. And I think just as a society, like, trying to reduce the impact of those gender roles is something we need to work on.
I agree.
What else did she say? It was a short video.
I think it was, like, cool how she talked about, like, how there's, like, all different kinds of bisexuals.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's not one specific, like, definition or, like, way of thinking about it. Like, any bisexual could have a different, like, attraction. Like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not wording it right, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah. What about that movie?
So now we're moving into the 3 Generations movie. Let's see.
I don't remember what Ray's mom's name is.
Shoot, I don't know either. Was it?
We can just do Ray, Mom, and Grandma to get like clear. I know because
I know the grandma's name was Dodo, but I don't remember the
we can
mom's
just
name.
we can just do that. I think that's easiest.
Okay.
I thought it was, well, something I get annoyed about a lot is when parents, like, act like they've, like, lost a child, or, like, their child, like, basically, like, died. Like, I think, like, to me, like, if I were transgender and my mom was like, I lost my daughter, like, I would feel like she meant that, like, a part of me had, like, died and I'm someone, like, new. But it's still that same person. It's still, like, the way that they've always been. It's just a different body. And I feel like a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their heads around that. But at one part of the movie, the mom was like, you weren't, when she was talking to the guy who, like, was his dad, but not really his dad, and she was like, you weren't there, like, I lost my daughter, like, blah, 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 and, like, everything, and then she, like, corrected herself, but it was, like, that is how people feel, and I think that's sad to feel, like, part of your, like, child, like, died just because of how they feel.
Yeah. Like to go through that grieving process. I feel like the mom was kind of like throughout the film kind of going through it, even though at first she seemed very like accepting about Ray, like using the pronouns that he preferred, but I feel like towards the end, or like towards the, not the very end, but like I think she was still going through that process though. I think she still was like, I no longer have, I don't even know what was Ray's before.
Ramona.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think she was still grieving, like she no longer had Ramona. Now she has Ray, which, I mean, obviously she loves Ray, but I think she was still like processing, because I mean so much was happening, like to go from like just changing pronouns to like going through with like hormones, and like who knows, later on whatever could happen, like whatever Ray decides what to do, but I think a lot of change was happening for her, and that was hard.
Yeah, I remember the mom, like, one of her biggest worries, I think, was, like, well, what if years from now Ray, like, changes his mind and, like, regrets doing this? I'm going through this process, because I know I took a gender studies class over Jan term, and, like, the hormones that you take, it's not good for your body. Like, there are a lot of health risks involved, so I'm sure that was on the mom's mind, too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think throughout the movie she was trying to be accepting, but at the same time going through like her own struggle of kind of wrapping her mind around what Ray was deciding.
I feel like for her it was about the responsibility, because I feel like she was fine if Ray was emancipated and like, okay, then if Ray is no longer, like she didn't have to sign.
Yeah.
It's on Ray, so that way if Ray was like later on like, oh, I made a mistake, it would be, I don't want to say his fault, but like it would be, she wouldn't be held responsible, if that makes sense. And I feel like that's why she probably had like a hard time signing it and going through with it, because that fear was just taking over.
I understand what you're saying, but I also feel like she like brought that up because she didn't want to deal with trying to get the dad's signature, who wasn't actually the dad, and then that whole story coming out. So instead,
that was a whole other layer.
Right. I was so thrown by that.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, like who's the dad? I was like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was more so to like avoid like having to deal with those other people
with her own.
I think, I think it was like, I was just trying to see from like her perspective, because like, I don't know, she could have technically signed before, but that's definitely a good point, because she had all that she never dealt with, and like to have to go through all that too. So yeah, there's definitely a complex situation.
Yeah, throughout the movie, like once I watched the whole thing, I was just like thinking about all the barriers that Ray had to face, like the legal aspect, the getting the signatures, acceptance from his own family, societal acceptance, like every single day, waking up like and feeling like this is not me.
Yeah.
I remember one part he said, the mom had said to him like, it's just a shitty day. And he said, no, Mom, it's a shitty existence. Like, I just can't even imagine feeling that way every single day.
Yeah.
Or I thought it was, like, interesting because I feel like when he left the house that one time and caught a black eye and, like, filmed it, like, I feel like he, like, definitely did it to, like, cause, like, a stir or, like, get the ball rolling and, like, really send, like, a message to his mom. And his grandparents, like, being like, this happens to me. Like, sign the papers. And I feel like that's a really drastic thing to do, to go out and look for someone who's going to pick a fight with you just to prove a point to your family that this happens to you.
I also thought it was interesting, wasn't there one point when Ray said to the grandma, like, you're lesbian, you're supposed to be accepting, or something like that.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that even though, like, she's also a member of the LGBTQ community, and she still was so, like, not accepting.
Yeah. For a lesbian, you're judgmental. Having
that was
sex
it.
with women doesn't mean you're open-minded. It just means you're happy. That's
Yeah,
what
that
said.
was the quote.
Yes.
But yeah, I guess that also just shows like the division within that community too.
Yeah. Yeah, that was interesting. I wrote that down too. Go ahead.
I was thinking about how, like, it would be for a transgender kid in a family where it is very, like, heterosexual. Like, he was brought up in a family where, like, not a lot of people have that type of, I feel like, environment being raised in. Like, a house full of women, 2 of them are lesbians. Like, that's still a lot more open than a normal household could be. So, like, it was still, like, really bad for him, but I couldn't imagine how much worse it could have been in a different household setting.
Or like in a really religious family. Yeah. Let's see.
I also thought it was interesting how the grandma was like, I've been fighting for, like, women's rights this whole time, and now my granddaughter is becoming, like, a man or something like that, and, like, why did I even, like, do all this? And I thought that was, like, I didn't thought about it that way before. Like, I guess if you were someone who had been fighting for, like, women's rights, I could see how that would be hard to see someone in your family who was, like, everyone assumed was a girl for a long time and then want to become, or, like, is, but then, like, wants to transition, like, physically into a male. I can kind of see, like, the moral, like, dilemma with that. But, like, still.
Yeah. Let's see. I was just thinking about, as a counselor, like, how we probably would have to work. We have to work with the parents, like the whole family, in this scenario.
Yeah.
I wonder if family therapy would have been helpful for Ray.
I definitely think so. Especially with the complex, how complex his real dad is. All that,
A lot going on.
I mean, even Ray at one point was like, "You're the reason why I don't have a dad," and like that layer was on. So I think there's just like a family dynamic in general, and then Ray who's like trying to transition as well. So like, I feel like therapy would definitely be beneficial.
I feel like when Ray had like the mental breakdown at his not dad but dad's house,
Because it's his uncle.
Yeah.
It was complicated.
And he had that like mental breakdown and started screaming. Like I feel like I could just like feel the frustration, like how frustrating that would be. That like everyone else is putting their own problems like before yours, when you're like the main thing that's going on, and for everyone else to be arguing about all these things that don't matter about your situation, and that's why you're all there. Yeah, how like frustrating that could be, and that you would just want to like scream and be like, why aren't you like listening to what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I had a thought and it went away.
I really liked at the end when the grandma was saying, "Who I love is like staying the same. Everything's changing. It's just the details."
Yeah.
So like you're still you. Like Ray is still Ray. It's just little tiny details are changing. And I like she's like, it's about time we had a man in the family, and like that was like a sweet moment for them. Because like this whole time, like his grandma would use like pronouns like she, her for Ray, and that wasn't you know.
She
but
was,
now
still rejecting his identity.
and now like she's finally the grandma's finally at the point of like accepting, be like, okay, it's just little details. It's still you, which kind of goes to what you were saying earlier.
Wow. Like, I think at the beginning she was like, why can't you just be a normal lesbian?
Yeah.
Or something like that. And, like, I thought that was kind of amusing just because, like, a lot of people, like, I feel like that's, like, showing how, like, people who identify as, like, lesbian or gay are becoming more, like, socially acceptable, but how being transgender still isn't acceptable. And, like, saying, like, why can't you just be a normal lesbian? Like, that used to be, like, why can't you just be, like, a normal girl or something like that? But now it's, like, moving up, but it's still not fully to the transgender part.
And even so, there's still problems within, like, just lesbian and gay, but still, I agree. I completely agree.
Let's see. Yeah, I also liked obviously that the movie had, like, a happy ending. But I do also feel like it was really idealistic, and, like, I don't think that, like, obviously not a lot of people in the transgender community probably have that type of outcome with their families. Yeah. Which is, like, sad to realize, but, yeah.
Wanna move on to Rothenberg?
Yeah. I'd love to. Nothing better.
What's
it's 65 to 76, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the first part. Okay. Oh, I'm so thirsty. Okay. Let's see. This section talked about masculinity, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this kind of touches on what I was talking about earlier, how, like, how do you know if, like, a man is homosexual? Like, how do you, like, look at someone and just, like, have that judgment? And it's, like, based on their mannerisms, and that's what this chapter talks about. And it's, like, every movement contains a coded gender language. And I feel like that's, like, really, like true. Like, you can just, like, tell, like, if a man, like, walked in here, like, every, like, mannerism that they do is, like, very, like, masculine in a way. Not like everyone, but for like a majority of people, you can definitely like tell different mannerisms that they do.
Yeah. No, it's funny. People always use the term like, I have a really good gaydar. And that just made me think of that.
Yeah.
You know, how people say, like, you throw like a girl, or he walks like a girl, he must be gay. Just those type of stereotypes.
Yeah.
Where if they're like emotional or show a lot of feelings, or if they like, even if they talk at a certain pitch, it's almost like, why is your voice like that? But it's just like something that's like how they talk.
Yeah.
But at a certain level, like you just assume that because you have this idea that people who are gay talk a certain way. But then you have people who are gay that look like what you would consider by society like a manly man, and
Right.
they can be.
Yeah.
So it's like, where do we get this idea from?
Right.
Yeah, my boyfriend's older brother is gay, and he definitely, like, you would consider him like a manly man. You know, you wouldn't, like, just assume he's gay just by looking at him or his appearance. Just made me think of that.
I think it kind of goes into like kind of our conversations before, in like our other video too, talking about like the fear that like other men will like unmask like men, like unmask each other, and that's why like they have such a fear of being perceived as gay. I feel like that's kind of been talked about quite a bit, and I thought that was. I feel like it's like really important to think about, because like when comments are said like, oh, you're being a faggot, or like things like that, or you're being sissy or anything like that, kind of like in our previous conversation, like starts fights, like, oh no, I'm not, like you have to prove that you're not. Like I even wrote down like once like the term is used, like being a fag or whatever, like the challenge is made, and then that boy has to like do whatever he can to prove that he's not, and violence becomes like the most like important like marker of like proving your manhood. It even talked about in like adolescence and how like other peers are like gender police, and like just even at that young age, I can just like you're already going through so much right now. Like going through high school, like you already have like changes in your body, like you know, there's so much going on there, and then you have like your pressures from peers and like having to be a certain way, and like instead of being yourself, which is like really sad to think.
I thought it was interesting how they said, why is transgender not a category targeted for affirmative action in hiring and valued the same way that racial diversity is valued. And I thought that was like really interesting, because it's not like, you don't see like race, like, I don't know, people want racial diversity, but you don't hear that with like sexual orientations. You're not like, we want to be sexually diverse. Like you don't hear that kind of stuff. But I was like, that is something to think about, because why isn't it? You know,
right?
Like I guess for like gender, like binary terms, like people, like even women are still having a hard time. Like being equal in a workplace. So, like, if that's not even happening, like, I assume it's even harder for lesbian and gay people, and then transgender, it's even worse than that. So, I feel like that is still, like, an area in society where it's going to take even longer to be more accepted.
I wrote down a quote on page 67. It said, in this sense, homophobia, the fear of being perceived as gay, as not a real man, keeps men exaggerating all the traditional rules of masculinity, including sexual predation with women. Homophobia and sexism go hand in hand. Just kind of talking about what you said about guys always having to prove themselves. You know, boys are taught from a young age, like, don't wear a skirt, you know. Don't do this. You're supposed to be tough. You're supposed to be strong. Kind of made me think. Growing up, I went to like a Catholic school, and we had uniforms, and all the girls wore skirts, and all the boys wore like pants or shorts. And I don't remember any, like, all the boys wore pants and all the girls wore skirts. So just reinforcing that, the roles at such a young age.
Yeah, we even had to wear, like, when I went to a private Catholic school in K through 8, like, even during the winter, you still had to wear skirts, and they were like, you just gotta put leggings on underneath. Like, it was freezing outside, and they were like, but you still have to wear your skirt. Like, what kind of shit is
Yeah.
I think I could wear khakis if I wanted to, but we never wanted to. We just froze in our shorts and our Uggs or our
See, but
skirts.
it's like to the point where you don't even want to wear pants because that's a boy's thing.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's
No,
like
it's
so
true.
like ingrained that you're willing to freeze instead of just wearing pants.
It's
Yeah.
true. Interesting.
Same thing with me. Like, when I went to high school, I went to a Catholic high school, and the same thing. Like, girls wear skirts typically. I mean, we were allowed to wear jeans. Like, wow,
Oh, I
crazy, right? But then it got strict after because they believed that girls, like, whatever they wore would distract boys, and so then they went straight into like strict uniforms. But
At that point, though, like, aren't skirts more distracting than tight jeans?
Yeah.
Like,
exactly,
I mean, it shouldn't even matter.
I
but,
agree.
like,
I agree. But
I mean, lengthwise, like, sure, your ass shouldn't be hanging out,
Yeah.
but, like,
Yeah.
still.
I agree. I thought it was interesting that it talked about like manhood is only possible for like a distinct minority of men, and that's why a lot of men often report feeling like powerless. What did you guys? What did you think?
It's a long quote, but in that section I wrote down, others still rehearse the politics of exclusion as if by clearing away the playing field of secure gender identity of any that we deem less than manly, women, gay men, non-native born men, men of color, middle-class, straight, white men can reground their sense of themselves without those fears and the shame that they're unmanly. So it's like this idea of manhood is only reserved for like a specific type of man.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I got out of it.
Yeah. To the other Rothenberg? Or
To these, we only have like.
Oh,
6
okay.
minutes
Yeah.
left now.
Oh, I didn't see the time. Okay. Are we going to D'Angelo then?
Yeah, let's do D'Angelo.
Good old
So we've kind of talked about it in class when we watched the video in class that D'Angelo was in, but I just the way she phrased it, like, would you be willing to grant me the opportunity to repair the racism that I perpetuated towards you? And then like afterwards, like she had that conversation, then she apologized, and then she addressed like, is there anything I missed? I think just going through that whole process, I thought it was like she handled it very well, and I even think that the other lady like was very like receptive and being like, okay, like I'll work with you because you're willing to like recognize what you did was not okay.
Yeah, I like that she did share that experience because throughout the reading, I feel like there's times where I feel like she's acting like she's just this person that's so woke and like not as racist as the rest. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like she's very. I think at times her tone comes off as like she's not ever racist. Not ever, but I like that she talked about how important the repair is and like shared her experience that like, look, you know, this is literally what I do for my living. And I still make these mistakes too. It's something that you're always having to work at. I like that she did include that.
I liked how she gave a list of all the assumptions or like norms that we have, and like how she said like, what did she say? Like that we have to transform our understanding of racism, and like if people were like more willing to accept these things, like whites are unconsciously invested in racism. Like a lot of people just like deny that right away, but if you're more willing to like learn and understand, then you'll learn that like that is like true. Like even if it's conscious or unconscious, like we all participate in the system that keeps white people ahead of people of color. And I feel like not very many people are actual like activists.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't actually consider myself an activist because I feel like I don't actually like do anything out in the community for people of color. So like I'm participating in like our racist society.
Mm-hmm. I think the one thing though, like to add with that, like I think it's important for us to like, I think in even our class discussions we talked about like being grounded and having foundation too, like before like going full force. So I think that's important to keep in mind, just like process. And I thought it was interesting that they mentioned like if you're not educated, like okay, then go out and get educated about racism. If you don't know people of color, go build relationships.
Yeah.
If there's no people of color in your environment, get out of your comfort zone and change the environment. And then I thought this was kind of like powerful, just being like addressing racism is not without effort. So it's like it's gonna take. It's not gonna be like, oh, wake up the next day, all right, totally good. No, it's gonna be it's gonna be an ongoing process, which I think she's kind of like talked about too. I mean, and what I think is nice about that, like what we talked about before, like having that moment where she made a joke, that that conversation. I think it kind of shows that, like, okay, like you're not gonna be perfect.
Yeah,
things are gonna happen, but how you address the impact that you made is important.
Yeah,
and, like, that's what we need to like work on.
Yeah, because she could have just been like, oh, she's overreacting, like this isn't a valid concern.
Or even just saying like, oh, sorry. Or like I'm sorry. But like the way she worded it was just like, like very clear, like I did this, I am going to repair this racism or racist act that I did.
I thought it was a good point that she made because she was like, once she like figured this out, and that like as soon as she like figured out that it was a problematic behavior that she did, she went to one of her like white friends because it wasn't the responsibility of people of color to like comfort her for that. But I thought what she said after that, she was like, be careful to choose someone who would like hold you accountable. And I feel like that's really hard to do. I mean, like for us, like being in a program like this, like sure, we're surrounded by people that we could probably go to and that they would respond in a better way. But if I were to just go out to like one of my random friends who's not in this program and like told them about a situation like this, they'd probably just like generalize it or like be like make a joke about it. Like they wouldn't actually take it seriously. So I feel like actually having people to hold you accountable who like, since we're all white, like, having white friends who can hold us accountable instead of us having to go to people of color.
Right.
And then
Right.
them having to comfort us for something that we did to them.
I agree.
Let's see. I liked how she said that her own interrupting her own white fragility, that like receiving the feedback she received from, what was the woman's name? Angela? Was that her name?
I think so. I didn't write down her name.
That receiving like that type of feedback was a positive sign in their relationship. Showing that she made herself like the woman of color trusted her enough, to be able to have that conversation with her.
Yeah.
And I think that as a society, we are so quick to just shy away from any, like, don't bring up race.
Yeah.
God forbid we talk about it.
And even confrontation just in general.
Yeah, no,
Like,
exactly.
It doesn't even have to be about race, and it's still, like, hard to do that, and then adding that layer of, like, a race issue, too, that's, like, super, like, double no.
Yeah. But yeah, I think just, like, being more open and having these conversations is, like, a step in the right direction.
And, like, I also like that they address, like, we can seek out information, like, from books, websites, films, and other resources. It's not, like, the conversations are great, and that's a great place to do it, but, like, there's other areas, like, like, if you have a hard time, like, having the conversation, you can start somewhere else, which I think is great because, like, I'm more of an introvert, so, like, I think I would prefer, which I'm actually doing now, like, with the little journals that we've been doing, looking at websites and, like, being aware of, like, language that I'm using and, doing those steps to, like, create, like, a better foundation to later be an ally.
Yeah.
I think I've talked about this before in, like, another video or something, but how she talks about how white identity is inherently racist and how white people don't exist outside of the system of white supremacy, and that you, like, shouldn't stop identifying as white or claim to be Italian or Irish, because, like, to do this is to deny the reality of racism, and that this type of denial is, like, colorblind racism. And, like, I understand what she's saying, but, like, to not claim, like, where you come from, like, I still say I'm white, but, like, then I, like, add on where, like, my family's from, and I feel like that's not a bad thing to do, but it made it seem like she was like, don't say that you're that, like, you're white and that's what you are, but it's like, people of color can say where they, like, where their families have came from, so why is that, like, any different? Like, I understand that you shouldn't just be like, oh, I'm not, like, white, I'm, like, these things, like, you're still white, but, like, I don't know. To me, it's like you shouldn't have to take away those other parts of yourself and, like, say that you're only white. Like, you should still say you're white, but, like, that you should be able to include where else you're from without, like, offending somebody else.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe she was trying to say that maybe people, they say they're, like, Italian or whatever, and just leave out saying they're white. Like, maybe that's what she meant.
And that's what, like, that's what I'm, like, saying. Like, people will say that they're just, like, somewhere from Europe, and they, like, won't say that they're white.
Yeah.
But it made it seem, I don't know.
Like, she didn't clarify.
To me, it seems like in a situation, people of color get annoyed if you, which I don't really know, but from what I've gathered from, like, books and what we've talked about in class, is that, like, saying that you're, like, something else besides, like, white is trying to, like, distance yourself from being white.
Yeah.
And I don't fully, like, I understand and I agree to a certain extent that some people are trying to do that, but to also like, some people say that just because that's, like, where their family is from. And, like,
Yeah.
even though they're white, I mean, like, their parents could have came from, like, Ireland or something. I don't think it's, like, something to get, like, mad about for it. Like, I think if, like, you don't know if someone's parents came from, like, Ireland or, like, Italy or whatever, and if they say they, like, identify as that, and then people get offended, like, oh, well, you're saying you're not white, but it's like, my family, like, literally, like, just came from there, like, 10 years ago or something. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like to get upset about something like that and take it as an act of racism by someone not saying that they're white and identifying as something else. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I think it might matter, like, what situation or, like, what the context of, like, if they use it as, like, oh, I'm not racist, I'm from Italy,
Yeah.
or, like, I'm Italian, like,
yeah.
things like that, then, yeah, that's not okay, but I agree with what you're saying, like, how, if you're like, oh, I'm Italian, like, that shouldn't be, like,
A problem.
Yeah.
But I guess to some people it could be a problem because they could just take it in a way where they're like, but you're white. Like, don't say that
Yeah.
you're this. Like, when you have all this privilege, which I understand,
Maybe write that about in the journal.
well, I think maybe D'Angelo should have, like, kind of clarified. I think she should clarify. Maybe that would be a good source to do that because.
Well, I mean, I understand what she's saying. I'm just saying in certain
No, I know
situations,
that,
I think it can be taken the wrong way by people
Yeah.
of color when, like, a white person didn't actually mean it in that type of way. They just probably didn't know that that was offensive to say.
Yeah.
Maybe that's an area for conversation.
Well, then I think that's good for, like, if that, like, was a problem, then that'd be good. Like, kind of like the situation that happened before, being like, okay, like, I'm sorry, that wasn't, like, my intention, but, like, addressing the impact that happened. I think that's, maybe that would be, I don't know, a solution. I thought it was interesting that she mentioned, like, she'd strive to be less white. And she wrote, to be less white is to be less racially oppressive, the need to be racially aware, to educate about racism and to continually change racial arrogance, and to be less white is to be open to, interested in, like, compassionate towards the racial realities of people of color. And I thought that was, like, pretty powerful and, like, showing, like, oh, because, like, when she first said, like, be less white, I'm like, how can you be?
Yeah, like, how do
I do that? But, like, she explained it, which was nice. And I don't know, I just thought that was nice for her to clarify and offer us a way to, like, you know, be more involved and, like, hold ourselves accountable.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about coats. I thought it was interesting how he said, when I was a boy, no portion of my body suffered more than my eyes. And I feel like that was, like, a really, like, deep statement to make. Like, the things that you're witnessing are worse than things that might have actually, like, physically happened to you.
I agree. That was interesting to read. I also thought when he was explaining about the boy who was killed because of their music being loud. Like, this, I thought this was really interesting when Coates wrote, he had died for believing his friends had the right to play their music loud and to be like just an American teenager.
That's what I wrote. Yeah.
Like that, like, just to be a teenager, like, listen to loud music. I mean, every teenager does that. My brother thinks he's cool and does that, like, in his truck, like, just to be, you know, like, just, but to be killed. I don't know. That was hard to hear.
Yeah, this chapter was sad to read. I wrote down a quote. He wrote, and I saw that what divided me from the world was not anything intrinsic to us, but the actual injury done by people intent on naming us, intent on believing that what they named us matters more than anything we could ever actually do. I just thought that was a really powerful quote, and just like how, like, that's what racism is, you know? It's like the belief that, like, well, you're this and you're always going to be this. And you'll not, like, regardless of what you actually do, we're not even going to give you the opportunity.
I think what was also interesting was when the mother of the murdered boy, like, turned to Coates' son, and she, like, said to him, like, you exist, you matter, you have value, you have every right to wear your hoodie, to play your music as loud as you want, you have every right to be you, and no one should deter you from being you. You have to be you, and you can never be afraid to be you. And I think that's just, you know, really powerful for what she's saying, like, because I feel like if I was a mother, and maybe, I mean, I'm obviously not in that situation, but, like, I feel like most people would be like, oh, you need to do this to just be safe, and, you know what I mean, like, don't have your music loud, or, like, you know, be safe. But I think she's trying to explain how important it is, like, no, you need to be you, like, and that's, I mean, her son was being him, like, being just a teenage boy. So I think that was helpful for him to hear, too. You know? I don't know. I thought that was just interesting.
The quote that I liked was when he said, I did not want to raise you in fear, false memory. I did not want you forced to mask your joys or bind your eyes. What I wanted for you was to grow into consciousness. I resolved to hide nothing from you. And I feel like a lot of parents today are like the opposite of that. They try to like shield their kids from things going on in the world, and then their kids are just like growing up without any like real awareness of what's going on, and that just like reinforces the system of being like blind to certain things. Or maybe just like a lot of white families don't even notice it themselves, so they're not pointing it out to their kids. But I feel like a lot of it now with social media, like, you know what's going on and you're choosing to, like, block it out or something. Like, there's no way that you don't know what's really going on in society unless you're hiding under a rock somewhere.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
feel like,
you'll see it on your feed. Like, things pop up.
Yeah, like, I feel like it's really just parents, like, shielding their kids from knowing what's actually happening in the world. And I feel like that's kind of not helping anything. Especially when people of color, like, they don't have a choice when they're younger to be shielded from it. They're just kind of like thrown into it from the day they're born. So I feel like shielding like white kids from like knowing everything that's going on, and then having kids of color who are just like going through it every day and know everything that's happening because it's happening to them is like, I don't know.
Yeah, like, definitely I feel like that's happening with parents, and even, like, in our previous conversations, too, like, about how just schools in general, like, not knowing, like, not educating students. Like, I even talked about in my journals about how I didn't learn a lot. Like, I'm like, what did I even take in history class? Like, I think in college, that's where I, like, began to, like, realize, like, the saying, the glass breaks or whatever, like, you realize, like, oh, wow, there's just so much that I don't know. And that's why, like, I've tried to keep, like, in my journals, I mentioned, like, trying to educate myself more. But I do agree, like, there's the parental, like, that, like, layer going on, and then there's also, like, education. If it's not happening with the parent, you know, having that conversation, it should happen in the school setting, but that's not even happening there. So, like,
so it's just not happening.
Right.
Do you want to touch just on the last part of Rothenberg?
Yeah, let's do that. What page?
460 to 465. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Perfect. So Rothenberg.
Yeah, this is the last.
Perfect.
I wrote down a quote from this chapter. Tragically, we do not always get the final say on how our black bodies are labeled. And I just related that to Coates because he talks so much about like the lack of control that he has over his body, and just kind of how like his reality was just decided, from the moment he was born based on his race. I connected that quote to Coates.
The quote that I liked was, "Will we ever have a home in this place? Or will we always be set adrift from the home we knew or the home we never knew?" And I feel like, especially for black people in this country, they were brought here without a choice, but it's still not considered their, home. And then, I don't know. I just thought that quote was interesting. Or, never knew. I don't know. They've been born here and have been here probably longer than a lot of people who are here, now. And I feel or the home we, never knew. That's, to me, I think that, what he's trying to say is, that people of color have been here for a lot longer than a lot of white people, and that, they don't even feel at home even though this is where they were born and have been here for, generations, but it's still, a white person's, world here, kind of.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, that conversation we had in class about acknowledging that, this isn't our land, I think there was a conversation about you're, stepping on other people to claim this land.
Yeah.
That's what that quote makes me think of.
Yeah. Or, Native Americans were here, or, a lot of, Hispanic people lived in California, and then we just, claimed it, and we were like, oh, we're here.
Before. Yeah, it was.
But it's, not even close. And, I genuinely don't understand how people can, say something like that, because I'm, wondering if they really don't have a basic education about the U.S. history.
No, really.
And, do you fully understand that they were, Native Americans?
They didn't
here?
listen in that.
I genuinely wonder the level of, education that people are getting, and if people who are saying that are just stupid or genuinely feel that racist to say something like that, or is it just stupidity, or is it both?
Could be both.
And then it doesn't help, in the education system, they barely address it, too.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that layer, too.
Yeah.
Being ignorant and not knowing. But then again, you could educate yourself.
Or they only talk about, if they mention it, they only mention, the good parts of it.
Very brief.
How they helped them, grow, corn and, learn how to, move about the land. But they didn't mention, and then we slaughtered them all. Or gathered them all up and made them march to a reservation. They don't really talk about that.
No, they don't.
No.
I think it was also interesting. I think I kind of talked about it before, but something interesting about that. I'll just read the quote. It says, "These days it seems that black bodies are even more threatened than they have ever been." But then then they address or maybe we have just been have more ways to document the beatings, the shootings, the other abuses that have been suffered in the recent past, and which I think it's been happening all this time, and just now with technology and how that's just
it's shifting.
How easy is it now you see anything happening, you just whip out your phone and start recording. Before you wouldn't know unless the news got it, or I don't know. That's only one way, but now there's so many people record live stream. So I think it's been happening.
Anything's on social media.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And like, I think it's been happening for so long now and continues to happen, but I don't know. I just think I feel like maybe people think technology is like, oh, it's more than in the past. It's like, no, now you just are not seeing it.
Well, yeah. You also have just a higher population rate.
That's true.
So obviously more of these things are happening. And then you also have social media, so you are able to record it more. It's not that I think it's getting worse. It's just that there's more people and there's more ways of seeing it.
Yeah, we're becoming more, I guess not everyone's becoming more aware, but yeah, like you said, more people are actually seeing this.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, all
All
right, bye.
Thank you. Bye.